The story of metrical lines in the English language begins with the work of a 14th century bureaucrat, courtier, and diplomat. Geoffrey Chaucer composed numerous works in the short and long form using Middle English and introduced rhyme and metrical schemes into the language. His magnum opus, The Canterbury Tales, is a collection of over 20 stories written in Middle English. The story is told from the perspective of pilgrims such as the knight, the miller, the cook, the man of law, the wife of Bath, two nuns, a parson, and others. Not only does Chaucer employ the point of view of characters from all walks of life, the story is also notable for its use of the vernacular English as opposed to the more formal French or Latin. Chaucer's syntactical and metrical innovations in his work are widely regarded as the beginning of meter in English. As a civil servant, Chaucer traveled extensively to Europe, and he was likely exposed to French and Italian poets. Boccaccio and Petrarch, whom Chaucer may have met during one of his trips to Italy in the 1370s, are two of his biggest influences. In fact, the Canterbury Tales is structurally similar to Boccaccio's The Decameron. The Italian language, and especially poetry, was lyrical and rhythmic, and Chaucer brought many of these Italian conventions into the English language. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is comprised of familiar stories that speak of a knight imprisoned by Theseus, a story on the theme of chastity. Others speak of virtue and also present English society and the church in a critical light. Many of these stories came directly from his European sources. However, Chaucer's innovation was not in terms of the stories he told, but the manner in which he wrote them. The flat and undulating text of Middle English was broken up into lines that observed rhythmic conventions of meter. Chaucer is credited with introducing the iambic pentameter into English writing. The metrical lines breathed life and rhythm into the text. Chaucer writes in The Knight's Tale, "Whilom, as old stories tellen us, there was a duke that hight Theseus. Of Athens he was lord and governor, and in his time such a conqueror, that greater was there none under the sun." Geoffrey Chaucer died in the year 1400, leaving behind an impressive volume of work and a considerable literary influence. Although Gutenberg revolutionized printing by inventing movable type in 1450, the first book in English was not printed till 1475. However, by the time Queen Elizabeth I ascended the English throne in 1558, printing was already well established in the country. Elizabeth brought an era of prosperity and cultural development. While the country burgeoned economically, the language also grew rapidly in the development of a standardized syntax through the works of notable authors and dramatists. Imagine an era where William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and Christopher Marlowe put pen to paper and composed prose, poetry, and drama in competition with each other, where they took the established syntactical and metrical traditions and challenged them with their innovations. They gathered in discourse, and as some scholars imagine, spoke in the natural rhythms of the iambic pentameter in order to extend its boundaries. Although linguistic conventions were strong, English was still a developing language, and the genius of English authors was extending the boundaries of its conventions. The technology of print was also making their work familiar to a wider audience across space and time. Poets such as John Milton, who followed the Elizabethan writers, had access to printed works which helped them develop their skills and further extend the language. William Shakespeare's plays offer some of the greatest examples of lines written in the iambic pentameter. In one of his earlier plays, Twelfth Night, he starts, "If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it, that surfeiting the appetite may sicken, and so die." This is the rhythm of meter, and Shakespeare employed it skillfully as a dramatist. In another one of his plays, Hamlet, the titular character gives instructions to a troupe of actors about how to speak their lines. "Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue, but if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines." Shakespeare is instructing the actors to observe the natural flow of the English language. His metrical device, the iambic pentameter. Although the iambic pentameter is not the only metrical device introduced by Chaucer and employed by Shakespeare, it is definitely the most popular. The characteristic pulse for iambic poetry is ti-dum, 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 ti-dum. Each one of the ti-dums is called an iamb, and since there are 5 ti-dums in a line, the line is in iambic pentameter. Each ti and tum of a line is a syllable. Therefore, each line consists of 10 alternating unstressed and stressed syllables. Taking the first line from Twelfth Night. "If music be the food of love, play on." In the mouth of a more skilled actor, that line would take on life on the basis of its meter. Try it with the first line from Shakespeare's Richard III. However, Shakespeare was never one to blindly follow conventions. If we look at one of his most famous lines, we will find how he liked to innovate. To be or not to be, that is the quest. What happened to the second syllable in the word question? According to scholars, that incomplete hanging syllable increases dramatic tension by introducing a break where the audience does not expect it. In the hands of a skillful author and talented performer, lines of iambic pentameter are transformed into musical notes delivered rhythmically. The Royal Shakespeare Society and many acting coaches employ an interesting approach to explaining the iambic pentameter to student actors. The meter, they say, feels natural because it is the rhythm of the human heart. Di-dum, 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 di-dum. A skillful performer will speak to the heart of their audience and can shape their emotional responses by varying the rhythm of their speech. However, some scholars do not find the conventions of metrical lines as visceral, natural, or impressive. Walter Ong, for instance, would classify metrical lines as formulaic stylings, a form of oral residue. He states, "You have to do your thinking in mnemonic patterns, shaped for ready oral recurrence. Your thoughts must come into being in heavily rhythmic, balanced patterns, in repetitions or antithesis, in alliterations or assonances, in epithetic and other formulary expressions." The jury is still out on whether prosodic conventions represent a natural flow of oral and written texts, or if they are simply oral residue. However, some recent research on the impact of prosody has demonstrated the following. Prosody is employed in silent reading. Research suggests that readers employ an inner voice in silent reading. This is like a reader reading aloud to themselves, but internally. Textual emphasis and prosodic conventions which guide the reading make the reading more effective. Children with autism are unable to process multiple cues, such as inferring a speaker's intention from emotional prosody. Students of English as a second language, especially adults, have difficulty relying only on their own perception of intonation. Tools that establish prosodic conventions can help those learners improve their production of both sentence and discourse level prosody.